targeted training. In addition to developing the new E-Plan intake completeness dashboard, the dashboard scorecard metrics have also been updated to provide a more accurate view of performance by including the percent reviewed on time by building permit type as requested by the board. And these new metrics can be accessed via the dashboards using online using the Get Involved link from the UPC homepage. So moving on to the Project 14 CZU rebuild process improvements progress to date. The board requested an update on outreach efforts to property owners impacted by the CZU fire. But before I launch into some metrics, I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that the 6-year anniversary of the CZU fire was just last week. As difficult as that tragic event was, it also revealed the incredible strength and resilience of this community. The lessons we learned continue to inform the work we do today, particularly around emergency preparedness, communication, recovery, and rebuild services. While there's still work to be done, there has been substantial progress in rebuilding our community. So to that end, I will launch into our metrics at this time. So as the board will recall, more than 800 parcels were impacted by the fire. And of those, about 697 of them were developed with one or more structures which were destroyed by the fire. So 200, as of July 1st, 272 of those parcels have been sold. 177 replacement dwellings have been constructed and finalized. Another 136 applications have been approved or are under construction, which is an increase of 31 since the last report to the board in April. In addition, in the last quarter, 11 new applications have been submitted, 2 have been approved, and 9 are currently under review. Rebuild permit application submittals have slowed down, but they do remain steady. And staff have remained flexible and solution-oriented in the review of applications, and the department continues to strive towards providing excellent customer service. For example, we still have dedicated appointments Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday to assist property owners with questions about the rebuild, and these are dedicated appointments to CZU rebuilders only. So at the April 28th meeting, the board directed staff to explore additional CZU outreach efforts for property owners impacted by the fire, specifically those who have not contacted the staff or the county per our records. So we have done some outreach. The planning department has. As the board may recall, the planning department sent outreach mailers, emails, and made phone calls to all CZU property owners who were stalled in the conditionally not cleared status. The outreach was successful in that it has helped re-engage owners who had stalled in the process. The CNC meetings have been effective in helping applicants identify solutions and get their projects moving again. In addition, the recently adopted definition of in-kind has helped in aligning environmental planning, environmental health, geology, and zoning regulations. So right now, to date, we have 22 active applications, CNC applications in process. All of the other applications have been approved or closed out. So that is exciting. I think we started with 90 at our last report back. So with regard to the additional outreach desired by the board, the outreach to property owners who have not made contact, staff collaborated with the 5th District Supervisor's Office to conduct this outreach, with the Supervisor's Office taking the lead to ensure affected property owners are aware of all available resources. The outreach consisted of mailers that were sent out in July to all 173 property owners who appear to have not made contact. The department has received rebuild inquiries and feedback as a result of the mailers, and when contacted, staff has taken every opportunity to inform respondents of their availability to meet with them, to discuss their project, and offer assistance in navigating the permit process. And I wanted to say that in addition to outreach conducted by the county, the long-term recovery group, and I see we have a representative here today, which is a local nonprofit that's dedicated to assisting residents who are recovering from disasters such as the CZU fire. They conduct their own outreach to property owners impacted by the fire as well. They've informed me that they're preparing to do another round of outreach this month to about 84 property owners. And I just wanted to say that through their good work, the long-term recovery group has been really effective in providing CZU fire survivors individualized support, especially in areas outside the immediate permit process, which the county is not presently well positioned to offer. I see it as a great partnership. And also as part of the CZU update, the board directed staff to extend the CZU rebuild directive. The directive was initially approved by the board in September of 2021. And the purpose of the directive is to remove county staff review of geologic hazards and mitigations from the building permit review process in a CZU affected area. The directive was initially set to sunset in 2024, but it was extended 2 additional years through this October. Staff is recommending a 4-year extension to the rebuild directive to align with environmental health's 10-year fire and calamity allowance under the code. In addition to extending the directive 4 years, staff will apply the recently adopted definition of in-kind to all rebuilds moving forward, which addresses prior inconsistencies between environmental health and planning's interpretation of in-kind development. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie Hansen, who is going to provide some information around policy updates and code amendments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Supervisors. Happy to be here today reporting back to you. Some of this will seem a little bit familiar. I'm reporting on projects 1 and 5, which are the county code amendments. Project 1, if you'll remember, is the long-term comprehensive code project, and Project 5 are the annual amendments. So I'm gonna start with Project 5. You'll recall this was adopted in June, on June 30th. Those amendments are now in effect outside the coastal zone and are pending Coastal Commission certification inside the coastal zone. Here we listed some of the highlights that are in the code amendments, starting with the consolidated definition of in-kind, which provides not only a consolidated definition, but flexibility on the location of the replacement. And also what the definition of bedroom was, which was another inconsistency that was tripping up some people's ability to rebuild when they had a septic system. The board approved draft amendments to Chapter 738, the on-site wastewater treatment system or septic regulations. Environmental Health is currently taking another look at those to see what else can be possibly added before taking those amendments to the regional board for feedback. So that should be underway in the next couple of months. There were other amendments too that were focused on streamlining, allowing for outdoor seating areas in parking stalls. You all remember the rezonings that we did for affordable housing sites. We did some adjustments to grading approvals so that more grading could be processed administratively and not go to the Planning Commission and so forth. And then we provided a bunch of amendments that clarified coastal regulations and procedures in accordance with changes in state law. We've been busy on Project 1, the comprehensive code amendments. We released a request for proposals in April, and then had interviews in June. We've selected BKF engineers to assist in this important project. They have approximately 100 years of experience in engineering and planning across the Western United States with 20 offices. They've done some good work in other counties, including Riverside County and San Bernardino County, as well as a myriad of other cities. So we're looking forward to working with them. Right now, we are in contract negotiations, and we're refining the scope of work to look for some efficiencies. We're expecting contract approval to come before the board on September 29th, and then we'll be kicking off right away in the beginning of October with that project. And in the squares on the slide, I showed some of the major components of that work, including research in terms of what other jurisdictions have done, how they structure their codes, where they've been able to incorporate objective standards and streamline reviews, an audit of our current codes and where those points are that could be simplified or streamlined. We'll have a team of staff in various focus groups kind of looking at what the consultants are able to provide and having back and forth on what the best solutions are. We're intending for stakeholder meetings of various groups. We're gonna have a special focus on a disaster recovery ordinance so that if and when our next disaster strikes, we have a structure with clear roles available on who can do what and what measures they can take to make rebuilding easier and faster for people. We'll have the draft amendments probably around the end of this first phase of the project, and then head into environmental review, additional outreach, public hearings, and adoptions in the second year. So with that, that's our brief report back today. Here's the recommended actions to consider the report back on the streamlined work plan. Item 10, initial plan thoroughness, including improvements to the building permit dashboard. And work plan item 14, CZU rebuild process improvements. Approve the resolution extending the CZU rebuild directive for another 4 years, and then direct staff to return no later than October 20th. And at this point, we're planning a much more comprehensive report back on all the components for that date. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start off by seeing if there's any questions from my colleagues. Supervisor Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious with the new, the people who are coming in for new permit applications, are these people who are previous owners of the properties that were impacted by the CZU, or are these mostly now people who have bought properties that were impacted and are now trying to build on these lots?
I would say a mix of both.
Okay. And do we have any sense of how many are in the 3rd district versus the 5th district?
I do not at this time. I can do some research into that and report back if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. And then
Okay.
additionally, I think there's the 173 folks that were reached out to, and it'd be helpful to know how many of those are in the 3rd district versus the 5th district.
Okay.
That's it.
Supervisor Koenig.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation and all the work that went into this report back. I appreciate the updated dashboards. I think they're responsive to this board's request. I do have just a question or two as I'm looking at the dashboards. So as far as the number of reviews by permit type, we're seeing, like, I'm looking at this, the nice bar chart plus line graph. I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, but I mean, I think there's just sort of gross number of reviews without seeing the actual number of applications. And so it's a little bit hard to tell whether we're actually doing less reviews for each permit type, or if the reduction is just the result of less permit applications overall, which it does seem like, based on some of these charts we are seeing, for example, quarterly shots of the permit center dashboard. There's just less applications in general this year. And so it's hard for, am I reading this graph wrong? Is there a different way that I could tell, or that one looking at this graph could tell like whether we're actually doing less reviews?
Are you referring to the graph that I showed earlier with the application intake completeness?
No, I'm
The
referring.
dashboard that
I'm referring to building permit applications, number of reviews, and percentage completed on time by permit type.
okay.
I don't think you actually had it in the presentation.
I did not. We do have Julie here who can speak to the dashboard, but what I can say is our submittal volume has gone down.
Right.
Yeah, we're at, I would say, about 50% submittal rate versus a couple of years ago. So that's the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you, this is Julie.
Hey, Julie. Yeah, thanks for all your work on this.
Am I on?
I think
Julie
so.
Newbold, Senior Departmental Analyst for CDI Planning. Yes, it's a complicated graph. The bars and the lines on the previous page, it also speaks to volume. And it's challenging to put those together into one visual. But by looking at the first one, you can see the volume of permits over the years, and the second one is basically reviews. And then a little bit later on in that graph, you can see the number of reviews per permit. Sorry. The number of reviews per permit that each agency is doing. And for environmental health or building, how many reviews are going into 3 or 4 cycles and how many are in 1 or 2 cycles. So it actually takes most of the metrics in that PDF in order to see what's happening for reviews by agency, reviews by permit type, and volume by permit type. So I'm happy to walk you through all of them with it in front of me, but
For sure, we'll have to we'll dig into it a little bit more to really get a sense of where like the number of reviews are actually going. I mean, it seems like they're coming down, right? Like a little bit
Yes.
faster than, just the total number of permit applications, which is the goal, right? To try to streamline the process.
yes.
But it's hard to quantify it on one graph. I get
Yes,
that.
and you are accurate, as Jocelyn said, the number of permits is going down, the number of reviews is also going down. So it's good that they're both going down at the same time instead of the number of reviews increasing while
Yeah.
volume is going down.
Right.
So both in the downward trend, but yes, that's a good
Yeah.
question.
Great, thanks. I also really appreciate the completeness metrics as far as the applications that we're receiving. I think that's something that's been lacking as far as our view into how well our permitting process works, and it's really helpful to know how easy to understand our application process is, and the fact that there's a lot less user accounts than there are applications, right? 132 accounts for 313 applications this year. I mean, that means that, potentially with some clearer instructions and some training, we can actually bring the number of complete applications up considerably. Do we have any sense of what other jurisdictions are seeing in terms of completeness of applications? I mean, we're a little bit over 50% in terms of the plans being complete. We always hear people complain about our bookmarking requirements, et cetera. I mean, is there anything are other jurisdictions, how are they doing?
I don't know if I don't think we have those metrics. I can say from working in several different jurisdictions, these are pretty on par metrics with other jurisdictions I've worked in. But we don't have those metrics. And I think it's challenging because a lot of jurisdictions don't use ePlan as their submittal portal. So it wouldn't be apples to apples as far as completeness, comparisons, but be happy to do some research.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to look at other jurisdictions, particularly ones that have, like, if they're measuring this, they're probably making it, I mean, that's already pretty nuanced, and they're probably making an effort to improve the process, and so it might be a helpful opportunity to connect with those jurisdictions and just see how they've managed to move the numbers over the years. You know, we're going to talk in the next item about ADUs, and, you know, it's looking at part of the permit dashboard. We're still up around, I mean, 199 days to approve an ADU. Now, a good chunk of that is in the client's hands. Where'd it go here? I mean, 88 days in the client's hands versus 111 in ours, but I mean, still, that's, especially given it's one piece of the puzzle that you also, that, you know, applicants are also gonna have to talk to, you know, get a hookup permit for water, that they're also gonna have to go through the fire, whatever fire agency, that there's, you know, all these other parts of the process that it still feels long. You know, how can we, what are we looking at to bring that down further?
We do have Brian Rubin here with us today, who may have some additional comments, but what I've observed is that the level of sophistication of some of the applicants that you see with ADUs is sometimes not quite there as compared to a larger commercial project or a single-family residence. So that those number of days that you see in the county's hands are attributable to the number of rounds of review. And so that means we had some incomplete applications. So I think that additional information on our website will help. Training, we are updating our ADU page frequently to provide additional assistance. And I do think that what has really helped is the requirement for meeting with applicants at the 3rd round review and the 4th round review. And I'll say that the ones I've seen, some of them have been ADU related. So that's what I've observed. I don't know if Brian has anything to add. Looks like he does.
While Brian's coming up, I will say we also have our ADU technical assistance program, and that's been able to help a lot of owners kind of identify those pre-development steps, help find consultants. It's pretty popular, and we're going to look at extending that work for another couple of years to kind of keep that assistance going and get the lessons that have become available to those people more widely dispersed so that people can get further assistance without having be the one that's being helped. So that's been a hugely successful program. I'll let Brian talk.
Good afternoon, Brian Rubin, Unified Permit Center Manager. Excuse me. We've seen a lot of success lately with permits going through the system quicker when an applicant comes to the counter and has an initial consultation and then follows up with either the Camino guide using the PPS meetings, the pre-permit screening meetings, and just meeting with our team to talk about what the requirements are before they just dump something into E-Plan. That's been really successful. We've had a lot of pre-permit meetings with the counter supervisor and I, and with some select staff, and seeing those packages come in as a comprehensive package on the first round makes the first review much quicker, and makes permits almost always approved on the 2nd or sometimes 3rd round. So the comprehensiveness reduces the timelines for review, and it also reduces how many rounds it goes. It's just a better product for everyone. We recently had a stakeholder meeting with a bunch of contractors, and one of the contractors said it's really helpful to push your team to take one extra week and just make sure that all the forms are done correctly, all the supporting information is there, because it'll ultimately save you down the long run, which was, a lot of people used to just dump things into E-Plan thinking they were gonna get in the queue and start the clock, which is actually sort of a disservice to a lot of people. And so we're seeing a lot more comprehensive packages now, and it's been a really good, a lot of good progression from where we were before. Thanks.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, maybe, hold on, maybe a couple other questions you may be able to help address. So, I mean, you mentioned with ADUs particularly that like the level of sophistication isn't always there. I mean, do we have some sense of, with the ADU permit applications, what percentage have, you know, a licensed architect or structural engineer on the project?
I would say a lot of them do, but many of them work out of the area or maybe not be familiar with the Santa Cruz County Code or the requirements. But I would say we see a good amount that are from licensed architects.
Mm-hmm. Like
Oh,
60, 70%, 50%?
I'd have to check and
Okay.
get back to you. Happy to do that, though.
Sure. Okay, and then I know another thing we discussed is just to try to bring that time down, that the applications are actually in the client's hands, and understanding that sometimes the clients themselves are not being notified when we actually knock it back into their court, right? We notify the applicant, which is often their contractor, but it would be helpful to just expand the number of people receiving those notifications, so that the actual person trying to build the, you know, home or ADU knows when their plan set is ready, and they can also push their project team to keep moving things forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of property owners that are a little out of the loop in terms of what's been submitted or what's been notified, and so we'd be happy to look into additional notifications, carbon copies, you know, other settings that we can do in e-plan as time allows. Sure.
Great. Yeah, I think both in terms of email and text as well, right? I mean, I think the more we can start to establish, you know, modern communication methods with applicants, that we'll continue to see approval ratings for the department go up, and feeling like we're responsive and available. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? I just wanted to ask a question about the 31 people who've applied for permits since April, 31 permits.
11 have been applied for since April. The 31 represents, and it might not have been totally clear in the staff report when I went back and read it, the 31 accounts for those that have been approved in this cycle and have undergone construction, initiated construction. So they may have been in the system before April, and they finally received the permit and started construction in this quarter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does then that 11 kind of match the trend of how, the frequency that we get new
Yes.
applications?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, great, that's helpful, thank you. With that, and seeing no further questions from the board, I would like to go to the public for public comment. If you're here to speak on this item, please feel free to join a line. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Martinez and members of the board. My name is Tanya Schweitzer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Long-Term Recovery Group. First, I want to acknowledge staff and the work that they've done on this project. I also appreciate being part of the consultation period ahead of the project. We recommend approval of the work plan and the Rebuild Directive extension. As you review the staff report, we ask you to consider a few key refinements as the work moves forward. Please track on the dashboard how many of the 177 completed dwellings and 136 active permits belong to secondary owners who bought post-fire. Including this on the public dashboard provides an accurate picture of true survivor recovery. Please add a timestamp showing when dashboard data was last updated, so we know that we are referencing accurate and true data or timely data. The new rebuild ordinance under the comprehensive code amendments need to cover all disaster declarations, including local and state declarations as well. The report notes outreach collaboration with District 5, but why not also District 3? Long-Term Recovery Group collaborates with and has active and prospect clients in both districts. Cross-collaboration must automatically include all impacted districts, and that extends to all the districts for the 2023 atmospheric rivers. There's still no formal referral process from the planning department to partner organizations. Long-Term Recovery Group has coordinated disaster case management since 2021 and is currently the sole provider in the county. We need an opt-in checkbox to intake forms. Vulnerable residents, especially older adults and those facing digital literacy and language barriers, need advocacy, and they need help clarifying next steps, scanning, uploading, and submitting documents, and they can benefit from access to rebuild grants and volunteer labor. They cannot use resources if they don't know that they exist. Thank you for extending your work on this and for hearing my comments today.
Hello, my name is Sally Lucier, and I've appeared before the board before. I am a CZU fire victim. On August 20th, 2020, 6 years ago, we lost 5 buildings, a main house, 3 rentals, and a garage. We currently have 2 permits for the garage and for a 486 square foot cottage, and in review process right now is our main house. My questions are really for the Office of Response, Recovery, and Resistance, as well as CDI. Meeting the code has cost a lot of money and a lot of time. Rebuilding after the CZU fire has required us to install 2 5,000-gallon water tanks, a fire hydrant, and the water lines to connect them. So not just the materials, but the labor. We've had to build sprinkler systems in our habitable buildings. The cost of the building materials and the labor, the permits, the special inspections. Are you aware of any grant or services to help with these projects? Our insurance has been fabulous, but we are also of benefit to the neighborhood around us. And the Director of Response, Recovery, and Resistance discussed this. There's a tremendous cost, both to us, but for the neighborhood. Is there any help in meeting these expenses? Thank you very much.
So, my neighbor and one of my best friends is senior staff at Roaring Camp, and his house burned down, but not in the CZU fire. I was speaking to him last week, and the insurance company offered him $500,000 to rebuild his house. Now, as I showed you earlier today, in most of the country, $500,000, you can build a really nice house. He got his quotes back from a builder to rebuild, and they came back at $1.4 and $1.6 million. So I tried to help him, and I can tell you from here that our seismic and our septic policy are crushing us financially. And so I set up a meeting to go speak with environmental planning. And as it turns out, our soils engineer retired in May, and we have yet to hire somebody else to replace them. And also our head of environmental planning is on maternity leave. So I have questions, I really want to try to help, and I have no way to get any sort of answers. So as we move forward looking at our housing policy, I always want to emphasize that it's not just about building new units. We have to put an environment in where we can maintain and repair our current units. And I know a lot of us love these big giant buildings that are coming up, but the vast majority of our housing is built by small mom and pop builders. And we need to provide an environment where they can also thrive as well. Otherwise, we're going back in the same boat. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Becky Steinbrunner. I look at the mountains out this window and think, if those were to become on fire tomorrow, what would we do differently, knowing what we know now? It's a possibility. What would we do differently? So embrace this as moving forward. I thought it was interesting that there was a question about other jurisdictions and how they're doing. The County of Sonoma has done an amazing job. And this county relied on the Sonoma County K-class regulations in the very early stages of the CZU fire recovery. It was too bad it didn't stay on any longer to give those who have maybe unpermitted or non-conforming structures a hand. So what are they to do? I saw in the, I'm glad that the program is going to be extended another 4 years, but what about those who had unpermitted structures before? I'm very grateful for the work that the long-term recovery group has done, and I think that the county should fund them. I think they have done phenomenal work. They are in the trenches, and it was heartening to see on this front page of a Sentinel recently, a structure, a home rebuilt, moved in, that the long-term recovery group shepherded. I was privileged to take lunch to those groups a few times. It was marvelous. The grand jury reports in 2023, 24, and 24, 25 addressed a lot of the issues that you're bringing up here now, so I'm glad that you're paying attention to that. I urge you to reinstate the Building and Fire Appeal Board, not being you, but actual representatives of the industry. And what are the stumbling blocks?
Thank you. Thank you. Seeing no one further in the room, is there anyone on the phone?
Yes, Chair. Taylor, your microphone is now available.
Hello, you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Taylor Cohan. I'm a local here. I grew up here. My family lives here. And I'm 32 years old. And as we all know, there's currently a pretty acute housing crisis here that directly affects my generation. And a lot of the NIMBY sentiments have already been a major obstacle to building sufficient affordable housing in the county. And I know there has been steps to develop the rental housing when it comes to the apartments and the high rises in certain parts of town, but that is just one part of it. And obviously the other part is a lack of housing inventory across the whole county has made it near impossible to buy or afford starter homes and rent for people my generation. So I wanted to speak in support of what Mondo was saying, and on the topic that the officials were discussing earlier with streamlining the ADU approval process being really, really important right now, and opening up the options for people to be able to build those faster, to be able to rent those out easier, and to be able to even sell them possibly as condos is stuff that could benefit everyone in the county, especially people who want to live here, who grew up here and who have the right to do that, who should have the right to do that. And there's room for nuance here. The county officials responsible for managing these permits, we can put more resources into it. And if there's something irresponsible or dangerous, it's those officials' job to manage that. And that shouldn't be a reason that we don't allow much needed housing development by local residential property owners with space and means and desire to build more housing for them to rent or sell. Thanks.
I see no further speakers online, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now return to the board for discussion and a motion. Supervisor Cummings?
Yeah, first I'd like to thank staff for their work on this and for the presentation today. I think we've all been trying to do everything we can to reconnect with, in particular for the CZU fire victims, really trying to make sure that the process is smooth, although we know with changes to state law and people who are uninsured and not realizing that at the time, there's a bunch of obstacles that make rebuilding challenging, but I do just want to commend staff on their effort to trying to make this a smooth process, and really want to thank the long-term recovery group and District 5 for their outreach. But I will say with the long-term recovery group, our office has been working with them, and it took a while for us to get some information out of CDI so we could get contact information for the long-term recovery group, but they have been actively working to try to contact folks who have not rebuilt or are in the process of rebuilding. And so I just want to thank you all for your ongoing work and commitment to helping people recover after disasters in our community. I don't really have any other comments. I just want to, you know, my hope is that we can continue to, you know, help people rebuild who have been impacted, and you know that we're going to be vigilant moving forward this winter. It's pretty unknown what impacts we're going to be faced with, but the fact that we have Super El Nino that scientists are predicting is going to be pretty intense, and those predictions have not wavered. We could be seeing a lot of moisture here coming this winter, and what that means in terms of landslides and trees coming down. We know that there likely will be some impacts, and so my hope is that we can continue to work together. I know the long-term recovery group will be instrumental in helping us to support our residents, but I know that CDI will also be very integral in terms of us being able to mitigate some of those impacts, and hopefully they're minimal, because we know that FEMA is not reliable these days. So my hope is that we can all do our best to make sure that we can mitigate those impacts. So I'll move the staff recommendation. I don't have anything else to add to it. So
We have a motion from Supervisor Cummings,
Second.
a second from Supervisor Koenig. I'll add a few comments. I want to start off by thanking the presenters for acknowledging the 6-year anniversary of the CZU fire. It's a big milestone, an anniversary that happens in our community annually, and just appreciate the acknowledgement. And my heart goes out to everyone who still continues to recover from that experience. I also want to thank the CEO's office and CDI for really your ongoing commitment to improving the rebuild process, both for people who lost their homes and also for people who have purchased the properties, because any of the streamlining work that we do does impact everybody. And so I appreciate those efforts. As was stated, my office did help to work with you to send letters out to folks who hadn't contacted our office but did lose their home. I just want to clarify that we did send those to all fire victims across the county, not just District 5. So residents in District 3 also received that outreach. And my hope is that more people will continue to contact us. There's a lot of reasons why people may not be able to rebuild. Cost, namely, is one of those, or changes in financial or personal situations. But it's even helpful for us to know that, because if there are grants or opportunities or funding or nonprofit support that's available, we can connect that information to you if you get in contact with us. So if you received a letter and you still haven't walked through our door, please do. We want to know where you're at and what your status is. And I think that, what this item demonstrates is a ongoing commitment and an ongoing conversation of how we can continue to improve. So the extension of the rebuild directive for another 4 years is an example of the county trying to be flexible and meet people where they are, so that our processes aren't the roadblock or barriers for rebuilding. I also appreciate the comments from the long-term recovery group of other things that we could be doing to improve, and 2 minutes wasn't enough to get all of that from you, so let's meet and talk about what else we can do, and happy to meet with staff as well to implement those ideas, because your work and your relationship with our residents has been truly vital to our recovery and our resilience, not just from CZU, but also the winter storms and future disasters as well. So that concludes my comments. We have a motion and a second. Are there further points of discussion?
I'll just say I'm very pleased to see the report today, and I think we're on the right track, and keep up with the good work, everyone. I know that there are some things that the state has handed to us that make rebuilding very difficult, namely new septic systems, et cetera, but until we can come up with a fix for that. Just thank you for making it easier for everybody.
All right, seeing no further discussion, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Supervisor DeSerpa,
Aye.
Koenig,
Aye.
Hernandez,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
and Martinez.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. We'll now move on to item number 11, which is to consider a report on the Housing Advisory Commission's review and recommendations regarding 2 accessory dwelling unit programs and take related actions. Welcome, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair and Supervisors. My name is Suzanne Issei, Principal Planner for Housing in Community Development and Infrastructure. I have Mark Connolly here with me today, so we'll be doing this presentation together. Let's see. So today's item has to do with 2 policy proposals related to accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. The board directed our Housing Advisory Commission to review these 2 policy proposals. That was back in spring of 2025. Just full disclosure, it took a while because the Housing Advisory Commission was being restructured in the interim, so that's why it took almost a year for us to actually have their meeting on these 2 items because there were a number of vacancies that needed to be filled. So in the spring, they met and considered the first of these programs at their March meeting. That was having to do with condominium conversions of ADUs, also known as separate sale of ADUs. And in May, they considered something called the ADU bonus program. Going into the first of these programs first, the separate sale of ADUs. So as you may know, state law in California until late 2023 actually prohibited localities from allowing separate sale of ADUs. So that law was changed. Excuse me. That law was changed by Assembly Bill 1033. Which permitted localities, so cities and counties, if they so chose, to adopt ordinances permitting the separate sale of ADUs. Unlike a lot of other state law on the topic of ADUs, it does not require localities to exercise this option. It's simply providing an additional option to communities on this point. The state law also requires such condo conversions, if they are permitted locally, they require the proponent of that project to comply with the Davis-Sterling Act and the Subdivision Map Act. Davis-Sterling is a quite extensive state law that governs homeowners associations and sort of all of their operations. Another part of the law is that for those properties that are seeking to do a project like this, if there is an existing mortgage or one or more mortgages or any other kind of liens on that property, the lien holder must provide written approval to the homeowner to do that project. Or they have the option, if they're unable to get that written approval from their lender, they could pay off that loan. Of course, that's a steep task to achieve for a lot of folks, but that is in the law. So in March, after considering the presentation we provided on this item, the Housing Advisory Commission voted 4-3, and I believe they had 1 absence at that meeting, to recommend that the board direct our department, CDI, to add this policy to its work program. And that would entail drafting in an ordinance amending county code to allow condominium conversion of ADUs. Now, I do just want to mention for clarity here, there are several different titles of county code that may need to be amended for that to happen. The primary one that we have in mind is 1310, which is the zoning code, but also the title that governs parcel maps and subdivision maps. This is, I believe, is it Title 14? Public Works is sort of the portion of our department that really is involved with those types of amendments. So it would involve some work from their team as well as county council if we are directed to proceed with this policy project. The second program that was considered was an affordable ADU bonus program. So the concept here is sort of borrowing a little bit from another section of state law, which is, many of you may be familiar with the density bonus law, which is an important part of California housing law. The city of San Diego some years ago created a program to kind of borrow that bonus concept from density bonus law, but apply it to a special category of projects which they called, ADUs. And the concept was, hey, if there are property owners out there that are interested in building more than one ADU on a property, how about we structure it this way? And at the time, this is sort of an important piece of context here, state law primarily at that time only allowed most properties to have one ADU on a property. So you could have the main home and then the accessory dwelling unit. So they were looking for ways to meet their RENA. They were in the process of updating their housing element at that time. And, just trying to find more ways to sort of get more units permitted. And so they came up with this concept where, hey, let's let property owners exceed that one ADU limit. For every one ADU that they're willing to sign deed restrictions and record those against title, imposing certain rent and income limits on these ADUs, we'll let them build one extra bonus unit, bonus ADU. If you think about it, that basically in terms of math translates to a 50% affordability requirement. But that's what they implemented. When they originally wrote this program into their codes, they did not put an upper limit on how many ADUs a property owner could provide. And that had some unforeseen consequences, which resulted in a little bit of a kerfuffle in their community, to put it mildly. So they had some projects where they were proposing 130 unit apartment buildings as an ADU bonus project. Now, I did connect with their staff. Their staff was very generous with their time and met with us and kind of gave us a lot of background on the program and the revisions to the program that happened more recently. Those really extreme projects didn't actually get built, but they were proposed. But there were a number of projects that were in the like 10 to 20 unit range that did get built. So there was a lot of reaction from the community for various reasons. It's sort of like the law of unforeseen consequences. There were a lot of unanticipated consequences to that policy change. So after, another round of sort of community engagement on this topic, they substantially revamped the program in 2025. So when we took this to the HAC, we kind of focused their attention on the current program guidelines, not the earlier program guidelines. And so that revamp basically had a new limit on project size. Now, this was specifically as they applied it to single family properties, and that was really what we focused on with this meeting. Because multifamily properties, it gets a little obtuse, because is it a multifamily project? Is it an ADU project? What's the difference? It's a little esoteric. So we thought, let's just take baby steps here in analyzing this. So when they revamped the program, they instituted a 6 ADU cap. In the meantime, there's been some significant changes in state law on the ADU front as well. There's been some legislation adding more and more to what sort of an applicant can do for ADUs under state law. And then there's been some evolving interpretation of the law by HCD. This is a State Department of Housing and Community Development, which just within the past 12 months, I believe, has come out with an interpretation, which is that a given single family property can have up to, is it 3 or 4 ADUs? It gets a little bit complicated, but at least 3 ADUs plus the main home, so up to 4 units on a single family property. So now, in comparison to that, the San Diego program, you're really only talking about 2 additional units in addition to what the state law already requires us to allow. So in that sense, it would be basically, you could do your 4, you would do 1 affordable, and then you get 1 bonus unit. Now, granted, it gets really into the weeds. There are some nuances in what types of ADUs you can do in that cap under state law, so not every property is going to qualify for every type of ADU that's on that short list under the state law, but I'm just trying to generalize here. So maybe there are some properties where they might need more bonus units to get to that 6-unit cap. So after considering all of this and taking public comment, the HAC voted 5-0 to recommend development of a missing middle affordable unit bonus program, similar in scale, function, and outcomes to San Diego's program, but including making the program available in the rural areas of the county, with community engagement prior to board consideration. Now, just a couple of points I want to make on this recommendation. It was a 5-0 vote because we had 4 absences in that meeting, so just to be clear. A semantics detail, staff in analyzing this, and again, in meeting and learning about the San Diego program from their staff, they had some other major unanticipated consequences of developing this program and calling these bonus units ADUs, which was that state law is very preemptive in the topic area of ADUs. And when they went back to dial back the program to put that 6-unit cap, they basically had some very unfortunate reactions from several state agencies, which I don't want to go into detail here, but just to say it caused a lot of last-minute scrambling and panic, and they were almost prevented from revising their program because of direction from HCD, the Attorney General, and the Coastal Commission. So what we're recommending to maybe avoid that sort of very complicated, unforeseen consequence is just don't use the terminology of ADU, just call it a missing middle affordable unit program, which would look and feel exactly the same. You're just not relinquishing your local control to the state in the same way that you potentially are if you're calling these ADUs. So moving on. This slide summarizes some of the policy considerations that the HAC considered and also the result of staff analysis in working on this. So in allowing the separate sale of ADUs, you got to kind of look at both sides of the ledger on this. That same unit that you're considering to condo convert, in the absence of this policy, it would be a rental unit. So now, to the extent that any applicants proceed with selling the unit, that's 1 less rental unit in the housing stock. So that was a consideration we thought was important. You know, it's the same unit cannot be for rent and for sale at the same time, in other words, right? On the missing middle program specifically, in the case of the county, we already have a number of codes on the books that maybe are slightly different than what's available in other communities that already allows a lot of sites within the county, particularly within both urban areas and in some sections of the code also in rural areas. Similar types of missing middle projects where you might have like multiple detached units on a site or multiple semi-detached or, you know, duplex or triplex type structures. So we have a program called SB 10 that was part of our housing element rezoning that's available in a number of infill sites in the urbanized areas. We also have something sort of unique in the county's codes, which is this concept of dwelling groups, which is available also on larger lots in the rural areas. And we can get into that more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to mention that that's not something that you find in every community zoning code, which essentially allows property owners to put multiple units on a site if it otherwise meets, you know, the various applicable development standards on that site without having to necessarily subdivide that parcel. And in that case, those units would be able to be rented out. Sometimes it's used for sites that are used for farm worker housing or other types of housing, both in urban and rural areas. There was a lot of discussion and a lot of nuance and difference of opinion amongst the HAC members on what type of restrictions should apply to the deed restricted ADUs if a program like this is rolled out, which affordability levels, occupancy and use requirements, things like that. So that would need fleshing out if we move forward with this program. There's also some administrative burden every time you set up a program that relies on deed restricted units. So somebody has to work with that homeowner to explain the deed restrictions, make sure they're accepting of them, get them recorded. Then they have to be monitored. You have to make sure that the occupant actually meets the income standard. So there's a lot of administrative burden associated with that. In the case of San Diego, the city there has its own housing commission, which is very well resourced and has a lot of funding and a lot of available admin capacity. And so they agreed to do that administration of the program for the city at no extra cost with no budgetary impact. We don't have that same relationship with our housing authority, so that's just another thing that would need to be fleshed out in developing a program like this. There were also some fair housing considerations, and this was part of the earlier iteration of the program in San Diego that resulted in some unforeseen consequences. What they found was a lot of investors were buying up what were otherwise lower priced sort of starter home, existing home inventory that was the focus of a lot of prospective first-time home buyers in some lower income neighborhoods in the city. And they were being outbid by these kind of small-time investors that were trying to buy up these sites and do these like multiple ADU projects. And that created a lot of unhappiness in the community, a lot of backlash. So one of the things that San Diego did in the revamp was to put some geographic restrictions to basically take those neighborhoods out of consideration for this policy. They used something called the TCAC, Housing Resource, I forget. We have a map on our GIS web that shows where these neighborhoods are, but it's a statewide sort of neighborhood scoring system that's used for citing affordable housing projects. So they use that data set to sort of screen out these neighborhoods where that unfortunate dynamic was happening. So with respect to both of these programs, some of the details that would need to be fleshed out in implementing a program like this would be any kind of locational considerations that the board wants us to keep in mind. Should it be just areas within the urban services line, or maybe areas within both the urban and the rural services lines of the county? Or would the board like it to be countywide, all unincorporated areas? And maybe the answer to that question might be different for the two different programs. Another concern is whether or not, if this program is rolled out, would these, particularly with this bonus program, would that type of program cause property owners and applicants to maybe choose to implement this program instead of doing a larger type of project? And this is particularly a concern on some of our housing sites inventory sites, some of those key infill sites that we're relying on to meet our RHNA. A third concern is workload and staff capacity among competing CDI work program priorities. And as I mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be just policy and housing staff, but also public works, their mapping team that would need to, particularly on the for sale program, would need to be involved, as well as county council. So I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Suzanne. Just a bit more to provide to you on the next steps and kind of some more of those concerns that staff has. So as Suzanne kind of brought up right there, staff has concerns both with, not only housing and policy, but also the DPW staff, the impact that this ordinance development would have. A significant concern would be, not just retirements and transitions, But, you know, like policy will be down to 3 planners full-time after next week for some time until we can make a backfill there. So staffing considerations are a big concern for us moving forward. And then looking at some of these, elaborating on some of these projects that we have, we're looking at kicking off next month, Project 1 for Streamline Santa Cruz, the comprehensive code amendments. That's going to be a big, heavy lift on staff, policy staff, housing staff. We have an obligation we can't get out of. That's the sea level rise vulnerability assessment that we're doing that's sponsored by the Coastal Commission. And then we have the Nexus study and some housing code amendments and about 12 to 15 ongoing programs that we have to do. I'm thinking like our growth goal, our general plan annual report that has to go to the state. So, you know, with, I remember that Supervisor Koenig said when we were going through the budgets, you know, having to do a lot more with a lot less. This would be an example of that and quite a strain taking these on. But the key here that I want the board to understand is that it's just going to mean more time. So looking at the timeline and the next steps, outreach is going to be critical for the reasons that Suzanne just outlined. Figuring out what the community really wants, what kind of traction is this going to gain? You know, how can this community kind of absorb some of the things that are, you know, foreseen in the ordinance, considering state law and our local considerations. We'd want to really take the rest of 2026 and draft some ordinance amendments and then start that community outreach. Sometimes you go back and forth, you maybe start with outreach here. For this particular one, I think what we want to do is we have some nice models in our community, surrounding communities that have done this. Really for the 1033 units, the condomization, not so much for the bonus units, but something that we can put together and then start some outreach and kind of figure out what the community can involve the board obviously with that. I see that taking the rest of 2026 and into 2027, and then we begin that approval process of the Planning Commission recommendation, and then getting to the board. That's probably a late 2027 effort, and that's gonna probably leak into 2028. You know, then I don't think the CEQA would be a significant concern, but that's also something we have to consider in here. And then there's always that possibility that we have something that comes up that might be a reset and have to start all over again, go back to the HAC and then Planning Commission recommendation to the board. So just want the board to be fully aware of that aspect of the concern and that this would just take a lot more time.
Thank you, Mark. And I forgot a couple of things I just wanted to mention as well, which was among all our other ongoing regular duties in our section, we review pending legislation pertaining to housing and land use. And one of the, or several of the bills we just came across in the last few days have some ability to maybe create some overlap or confusion with these two policy programs. So one of those is there's a pending bill. We don't know if it's going to get all the way to the governor's desk and signed, but it's pretty far along in the process right now, which would further revise ADU law to allow single family properties to put 2 detached ADUs on a property instead of currently it's 1 detached ADU, 1 junior ADU, and then the possibility of also a conversion and or attached ADU, something along those lines. So I think it would be important to see where that bill lands before we land on a final program with respect to the bonus program, at least. There's another bill pending that if passed would require communities, cities and counties to process townhome project proposals and maps, so condo townhome maps on a ministerial basis. If that goes through, that's gonna be another workload impact again for our mapping team, I believe, as well as for our policy team. And then there's another bill that would put further limits and also grant, if I understand correctly, more appeal rights to applicants dealing with post-entitlement permits. What that means is building permits, grading permits, demo permits, all the other types of ministerial permits that people need to start construction on a project after they got their planning approvals. So I just wanted to throw, those are just 3. That's not an exhaustive list, but it's kind of like we're operating from a policy perspective a little bit in this sort of quicksand environment where the ground is always changing under our feet in terms of what's the state law foundation that we're working from. So that's just something to keep in mind. What was the second thing? Just to mention in terms of this slide that's in front of you that to roll out these programs, to really dial in on some of the more housing policy related details of the program, such as the things like what kind of deed restrictions would they be and that sort of thing. You may want to also bring it back to the Housing Advisory Commission after the initial public outreach. So with that, our staff recommendations are here. And of course, we'd also like to open it up for public comment when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm going to start off by seeing if there are any questions from the board. Supervisor Koenig.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work that has gone into this so far. Just wanted to provide a little context as to particularly the AB 1033 piece of this, the condoization. I mean, I hear the concern that this could take rental units off the market, but at least from what I've seen, we have no shortage of rental units coming online in this county. I mean, a lot of them are affordable, not market rate, as we've discussed at length, but where there's really a shortfall is in home ownership opportunities. I mean, I think this board has approved a couple projects. Well, actually, I think we've entitled 3 and maybe 4 within the next month or so. One is not moving forward right now. The one on Madison, the Maciel one is, the SoCal Avenue one appears to be as well, but still just there's a lot less than, I would say, rental opportunities. And so I think that actually creating a program that allows ADUs to be sold via condo projects or condoization of ADUs is probably the greater shortfall, right? Those ownership opportunities. And so, especially given, I think, comments I've heard from this board that we need to provide some more of those first-time home ownership opportunities, that the program does meet the greatest need. Now, I know that when you look at San Jose, and I think San Francisco adopted an ordinance like this as well, that there hasn't been a ton of uptake yet by people actually building those. But when you look at Seattle, where they have a more mature market and developed program, I mean, as many as 58% of the ADUs permitted in 22 and 23 were associated with condominium developments. So, I mean, hundreds of new units coming online for sale that are ADUs. So the potential is there. And I think that it's, especially because this is, I mean, I understand there's implications with our mapping team in Public Works, but still relatively straightforward ordinance. I mean, it's a one-page ordinance that, at least on the 1310 side, the zoning side, that City of San Jose implemented, the one that I saw, maybe 1.5 pages. So I think that we could move forward with that, like, relatively quickly. I think it's worth also starting the discussion on multiple ADUs, and maybe that bears some, maybe you don't rush into it, because I appreciate that the state is constantly changing things, and that is frustrating. I mean, I think even when this board directed the Housing Advisory Commission to look at this, it was still, 1 ADU per property, and now we're up to 3 or 4. I mean, I'm not even sure myself which it is. I agree, respect that maybe we don't need to rush into implementing that particular piece of it, but I think we should continue the conversation. So those are my comments. No particular questions at this time. Thanks.
Supervisor Cummings.
Yeah, one quick question. Well, maybe the answer's not quick, but I'm just curious, since we've updated our policies to align with SB 9 and SB 10, have we seen any utilization of those two state laws here in Santa Cruz County?
I could speak to SB 10. Mark, do you want to answer the SB 9?
And
Yeah.
maybe just also, if you could briefly just describe those two programs so that members of the public know what we're talking about here. Thank you.
Yeah, so the SB 9, to answer the question first, it's kind of been down a little bit. Our permit data has shown that we've been down a little bit on SB 9 applications. We went through a very robust effort last year, and then an amendment to that had to go through the Coastal Commission. But it really hasn't taken off with the same gusto that we saw it take off with in the beginning. So, SB 9 allows you to either do a 2-unit development or a subdivision, a 2-lot subdivision. It's a really nice way of getting some affordability, and it fits nicely in this community, but it's kind of leveled off lately.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think, in terms of permit activity right now, we're in very challenging economic times right now. And so I think, there's a lot of that influence on our activity levels. It's not just a matter of what the codes say or what the law says. And that's affecting both, your homeowner occupants, the home, who might want to do something like this, as well as your larger development companies that are trying to, pencil out their 100-unit townhome project. Like, everybody's being affected by the high interest rates, the tariffs, all kinds of other stuff. So I think we have to remember that, SB 10 was another law that was passed, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that allowed communities to upzone infill lots that were, at the time of the upzoning, designated as single-family zoning. And they had to meet certain size and density parameters set out by the state. And the law provided that any local ordinance that implemented that law, the ordinance itself would be exempt from CEQA, so you wouldn't have to do some environmental review just by basically upzoning some infill sites. So we took advantage of that law in context of the housing element update and the sustainability update. So we sort of scoured all of our infill neighborhoods within the urban services line and identified a number of properties that met the criteria of that law. I believe like some of the easier ones to understand are the size of the lot had to be roughly between like 4/10 of an acre and an acre. You couldn't go much bigger or smaller and meet the standards of the law. So if you look at our sites inventory and specifically the subset of parcels that we rezoned to meet the housing element requirements, I believe about half of those parcels that were rezoned pursuant to that SB 10 law. And basically what it creates is a sort of medium density option for folks, and you might have parcels that are sort of sprinkled in a sort of checkerboard fashion amongst other existing, mostly single family properties. But where folks with these parcels have a variety of options from a design perspective, they would all fall in the category of what we would call missing middle. So not super low density, not super high density, but maybe things like a small dwelling group of up to 8 or 10 units. They could be attached, detached, some combination of the two. You could do a primary unit with a number of ADUs. So it's like the physical design of a project like that is very similar to what the San Diego bonus program was resulting in that 5 to 10 unit range on an otherwise something that appears to be like a single family lot. So that's the SB 10. We have had a couple of property owners come in with various pre-development or preliminary applications to pursue projects under that construct. I don't think any of them have gotten to the point of breaking ground or even filing a building permit yet. But again, it's challenging economic environment. So, this is always a good time to do your analysis and your design and then wait for the right economic moment to actually file your building permits and start construction.
Great. Thank you. I have comments, but I'll save them until after public comment.
Thank you. Further questions? So let me just make sure I'm understanding correctly on the affordable ADU program, the bonus program, it'd allow up to 6 additional dwellings if one was deed restricted affordable and 1 bonus dwelling, right?
Yeah, so the details will vary a little bit from property to property, depending on how many of those state-allowed 3 and/or 4 types of ADUs they could achieve on their parcel. There may be some parcels where they could only achieve maybe 2, so maybe they'd need 2 bonus units and 2 affordable to get to
Gotcha.
the 6.
For somebody who has the space, what's the number they could build now?
Under ADU law.
Uh-huh.
Again, it gets really complicated because it's not like just a blanket, you could do up to 3 or 4 ADUs. It's like, you can get 1 ADU of this type, 1 ADU of that type, not every home. Like, for example, one of the types is something called a conversion ADU. That means you're converting existing space in an existing building to an ADU. So if you're someone starting with a vacant property, that's not a type of ADU that you would be eligible for because you have no existing buildings on that property. So for that applicant, let's say, they wouldn't necessarily get to max out all the allowed units under state law.
Right.
They'd be 1 short, so maybe they'd need an additional affordable unit to get up to the 6.
So where did you get to it was like a 50% affordability number?
Well, just the San Diego program itself, even before they dialed it back, it was a 1-for-1 requirement. So for every 1 affordable ADU somebody agreed to build, you could get 1 bonus ADU. So 1-for-1, total of 2, 1 of which is affordable, that's 50% affordable. Right?
Got you. And I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I've seen a lot of spaces that have multiple ADUs on their property. Is there a lot of desire in our community type of development?
It depends. I would say the folks I've had conversations with, again, our books have allowed this thing called dwelling groups for decades. Some people may not be familiar with that section of our code, but we have allowed, if you want to think about it as a multifamily property, but the units are these little detached cottages instead of being apartment complexes. This, in the old days, like in the 20s, 30s, 40s, this was a common development type throughout suburban California. They called them cottage courts. We have some examples like this in like SoCal Village. There's some out in the rural areas as well. So there is interest in that type of development because often it can be cheaper to build a detached single story than a little apartment building with maybe 2 floors and 10 units or whatever, right? Just the building codes for multifamily structures are a little more complicated and it gets more expensive to build the more units you have kind of combined, especially if you're doing a small scale project, right? And so a lot of the, more small time contractors have a preference for doing, multiple detached units as opposed to attached product, which gets more expensive to build. One of the challenges that we see people who maybe they have a larger property in a rural area that they'd like to pursue, whether it's under our dwelling group codes or whatever code. The thing that we see people really run into that is really a constraint is the septic, the expense. It's not that there's not a legal path forward, it's the expense is cost prohibitive. We are getting a lot of information from our Hello Housing, which is the program administrator for our existing ADU incentives program. They've been working with about 300 different applicants, families, interacting with that program over the past 3 years, and about half are in the rural areas. And I don't think there's an example of a single one that's been able to get through that. Maybe not every single one is because solely the septic. It may be all of the costs associated with building that unit are preventing some of them, but the septic issue has been the big constraint for the bulk of the people in the rural areas. And that could equally be a constraint with this bonus program if it was made available in the rural areas.
Right.
And I'll just add too that, something that isn't very visible when you see these properties, to your point of seeing many on sites, but to speak to the financial economic piece of it too, is JADUs. So those are attached units to homes that you wouldn't necessarily see at, just glance, but, are building permit metrics last year showed that there was a lot of those JADUs because they're cheaper to build. But you wouldn't necessarily see those in the built environment.
Gotcha. Good, good, good. And so, you know, I'm thinking about this in the context of my district, which is mostly rural. Most of my residents have septic systems, and, you know, we would love to see ways of increasing reasonable housing stock in our area, but those barriers continue to exist. You know, when I look at these two programs, you know, we could talk about the kind of cost effectiveness of getting involved in them, and, you know, adding this tool to the toolkit, you know, might be appropriate or not. But do you see that can you imagine that it would help the housing challenges that we have in the rural parts of the county, either of these programs?
Well, I mean, maybe marginally so. I mean, if someone, maybe right now they have the option of pursuing a dwelling group, but that might be, you know, maybe a level 5 discretionary permit, which has a little bit more cost and risk potentially, versus if this program was set up, and of course it would be the board's decision, do you want to make it a ministerial option or a discretionary option? That's a whole nother conversation that would occur as the policies developed, right? But if it were rolled out as a ministerial option, there would be some marginal reduced cost at the planning application stage. But in terms of the building permits and the construction costs to build it out, and particularly whatever the infrastructure is required, whether it's water, septic, fire, driveways, what have you, it's all the same, whether you call those units ADUs or cottages or anything else. Construction cost kind of is what it is, right? So I don't know that it's going to make a huge difference in how many people can actually afford to build these. And the other thing we've learned from our program administrator in the incentives program is, you know, the minimal cost they're seeing to build a very modest detached ADU is like $500,000. That's not including the septic system, which may be another 100 to 200K, depending on what their existing system looks like on their property.
Mm-hmm. Right. And speaking to the bonus side of it too, if you talk about adding 2, 3 ADUs to the load of a septic system and that additional drain on that well, that's a big barrier to entry right there.
Right, yep. And I think, you know, at least I don't want to move in a direction that creates barriers or limits the ability of people to develop ADUs or affordable housing. You know, I think the question before us is, are these paths going to be effective or have the biggest bang for its buck, basically, as it relates to the time it takes to implement a program like this versus the number of units or units sold or units developed that helps our affordable housing challenges. Because I think ultimately that's what we want to do is address our housing shortages. Supervisor DeSerba.
So I represent District 2, and I've learned in the last 18 months certain things that I'd like to just share with everybody here. So even when you try to put an ADU, or maybe you had sort of an artist studio or something in your backyard and you try to fix it and just make it a little ADU, the connection to SoCal Water is like $35,000 minimum. And what is our sanitation connection for an ADU, like the toilet? I don't know what the cost is there, but I know there are costs associated with that as well. And I don't know if those go. Thanks, Matt, for coming up.
Real quick, good afternoon, Matt Machado, CDI Director. So for ADUs, for sanitation, their monthly rate goes up. It goes up pretty significantly, actually. It's like a 1.5 or goes up significantly. But the connection charge isn't the problem. It's the regular utility bill that goes up so much is what we've heard.
And in the rural area, if you have a regular water tank and you add an ADU, my guess is that you'd have to then double the size of your water tank as
Certainly
well.
have to upsize it. That's correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And is it possible to put in the deed restriction that neighbors will have to get along? Because I cannot tell you how many neighbor disputes, right, my office hears about and wants us to help settle in some way. And I just think about if we are selling ADUs and there's shared driveways and, yeah, it gets complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had that on a slide when we brought this one to the hack, the for sale option that, you know, whereas if you have a home in an ADU and you're renting out that home, worst case, if that relationship goes southward, you know, at some point you could terminate your lease, right? Or tell your child, if, you know, a lot of times these are rented to family members, tell your child it's time for them to look for housing elsewhere, right? But if you've sold the property, you're out of luck. There's no way to address it other than you selling your house and moving somewhere else at that point.
Thank you. I think it's time to hear from the public on this. So if you're here to speak on this item, please go ahead and form a line or raise your hand if you're online.
Okay, so as we know, ADUs now make up the vast majority of new units sold, or excuse me, created in this county. So any sort of idea that this is an administrative burden to us, this is our #1 source of new units. So those of us here in the commission, we looked across the country. We looked, okay, what are some of the housing options that are actually working, and what can we do to bring them in here to help? And so these proposals will help every single district here. Justin, I've heard your rightful critique that a lot of the new housing built isn't affordable. Communities across the state and country have already adopted these policies. San Jose and Santa Cruz already have it in an ADU sold as a condo for an astounding $1.5 million less than the average price. Felipe, in our rural areas, they're ripping out apple trees everywhere. I can't believe we've created an environment where growing apples is no longer financially viable in this community. We specifically addressed that in this ordinance by allowing this in our rural communities. We need this. Monica, the disasters, the people that build ADUs are the same type of local mom and pop builders that are gonna repair our homes during disaster. It's unfair for us to ask that industry to stay here and only be here when we need them in a disaster. If we don't support them with new housing throughout the way, they're not gonna be there for us. Kim, I've talked about Pajaro Unified District is gonna lose 1,500 students in the next 4 years. That's an entire high school's worth of students and staff that are going away. This will help address that. Nicole, oh, can't forget about you too, okay? This is gonna create a sizable amount of revenue. I don't know any other housing around here that we can build without subsidies coming in that can actually lower the cost of our housing and at the same time allow us to build it. This is a win for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrunner. I keep thinking about a friend of mine who lives out on Valencia School Road. And he was very worried about his neighbor with a project. He was going to put in 11 units on his parcel and could do so, especially if he subdivided the property. He was worried about the water. He was worried about the traffic, and he was worried about whether these would be compliant with sprinklers for fire protection. Would there be enough water for fire protection? So this is an issue for everything in the rural areas, but especially if these small units become a lot of them in a small space. I think it is a way to address the housing needs, hopefully the affordable housing needs. But I think we've got to do it in a way that the public who would be affected by it is not shut out. And I think we have to do it in a way that it would not become vacation rentals, and that the minimum health and safety impacts are what I want to know is if these for sale ADUs could help qualify for the Measure J. I know that Mr. Heath disagreed. I disagree with you, but 15% of our building subdivisions need to be deeded affordable for sale under Measure J. So how does this work with that? I'm curious, in closing, the HAC, I've gone to many of those meetings, and they're very good discussions. The HAC voted 4-3 to recommend that you direct CDI to change the county code. That's a rather interesting vote, and I would like to know a little more about what their concerns were. Thank you.
Is there anyone online?
Yes, Chair. Rafa, your microphone is now available.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. This is Rafa Sonnenfeld calling in on behalf of Santa Cruz EMB. We sent in a letter yesterday in support of the HAC recommendations for both programs. We're really excited to see more opportunities for more housing types in the county, and we encourage the supervisors to move forward with allowing the planning staff and to start the public engagement process and to work up proposals for both programs. For the for sale program, that, as has been mentioned before, will help spur homeownership production. And it's not just about converting existing ADUs into for sale homes. It also helps with the construction of new ADUs, because there's less risk that banks have to take when an ADU can be sold separately. It can be traditionally financed through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac type traditional mortgages, and banks like that. As far as the bonus program, we also support that program both inside and outside of the urban services line. There's certainly questions about how exactly that should be implemented, and we look forward to participating in those discussions as details get fleshed out. Thank you very much.
Taylor, your microphone is now available.
Hi, Taylor Cohan again. May have got ahead of myself in the last one a little bit about the sale of ADUs, but I am not just a local here who is...
The recording has stopped.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm not just a local here in the generation that is affected by the housing for sale crisis and being able to afford a home in the place where I grew up, but I work in real estate as a realtor and as a property manager. And I've seen, directly that, shortage of inventory is a big...
Seems we might be having some technical difficulties.
It's possible. Unclear.
So, sir, if you are still speaking, we lost audio. So if we can get it back, we'll restart the timer so you can begin your comments again, but please hold.
We should make sure that it's not a larger problem before we continue the meeting.
He said it's good.
We got a thumbs up from the folks in the room that it's okay.
I'm just confirming with our IT team that on the other end that we're still correct.
you have an update for us?
Yes, we're just attempting to restore our connection for our recording purposes.
Gotcha.
The meeting has not gone down, though. We are just temporarily not recording. If we could just take one moment, I believe we'll have it restored.
Great.
Recording in progress.
If somebody on Zoom could please confirm that you can still hear us. Thank you. We have confirmation that they can hear us and that the recording has resumed.
Thank you. So we'll continue with public comment, and I wonder if we can invite the gentleman to begin his 2 minutes.
I don't see the speaker online anymore. I believe he may have disconnected from the call.
Okay. Mr. Heath, do you have any concerns about that, if he's been disconnected?
He is reconnected.
Okay.
Taylor, you should be able to re-begin your comments.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying, yeah, I think I agree with Supervisor Koenig, if I hope I'm saying that right, and Mondo, Morlos, and those who are talking about, how we have been rightly addressing the rental housing issue and developing, buildings and apartments for that. But on the other side, people in my generation do want to be able to have affordable options to own housing here and put down roots here, contribute to this community, have families here that can go to the schools and, thrive here. And I do think, allowing more ADU construction is a win-win in that regard. There are valid concerns about, some of the potential for irresponsible or intrusive buildings, but I think there's room for nuance, as I said earlier. If there is going to be an impact on water for a certain area, if there is going to be an impact, or if someone does want to build a high rise in their backyard, I don't think it takes a lot for us to be able to use our common sense to not approve that. What really is going to happen here, I think, for the most part, is people will be incentivized to build more ADUs, and those type of people will be the mom and pop, family residential homeowners who have space to do it and means to do it. And I do think, as a realtor and property manager, I think people would be more incentivized to build them both for renting and selling, because having that, when you buy an investment property or you build an investment property, knowing that you can sell it or capitalize on it down the road, it's another incentive. It doesn't mean you won't rent it for 5, 10, maybe more years.
Thank you.
We have no further speakers online, Chair.
I'll now bring it back to the board for discussion and a motion. I'm going to start with Supervisor Koenig and then go to Supervisor Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. I will move the recommended actions with the direction to pursue both ADU programs with priority for implementing an AB 1033 ordinance.
Second.
And I mean, I have acknowledging that motion is still fairly open-ended. I mean, I think we heard as far as the number of units exactly. I mean, I would agree that around 6 is probably a good idea, but as we navigate continued changes from the state and comparison with our dwelling groups ordinance that already exists, I mean, and hearing feedback from the community, it's purposely left a little bit open-ended to find what exactly the right number is. I think also we need some feedback from the building community that would actually be constructing those units on what makes sense. And then the 10, we also heard that there's a desire to see some of our rural parcels utilized for this program as well. So I don't think, I didn't want to at this time limit it to just parcels within the urban services line. As we heard, there might be other constraints like septic that are naturally creating a limitation on those, or creating an additional limitation, even whether that's, you see that as natural or unnatural. But I do think we can get the 1033 ordinance done relatively quickly, and I think I'd like to see that prioritized.
So we have a motion from Supervisor Koenig, a second from Supervisor Hernandez. Supervisor Cummings?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to just thank staff for the presentation, for all the work that you all have done on this. I want to thank the HAC for their work and review on this. I just have some serious concerns with this policy and some of the unintended consequences that could come as a result of it. I think we saw from what staff's presented today, what happened in San Diego as an example of some of the unintended consequences. And I'm going to align myself with staff on this one, that I think what would probably be best is for us to continue monitoring these other programs, these condo conversion programs in other communities, and also that we continue monitoring our SB 9 and SB 10 programs, which allows for increased density on smaller lots, some of which could be attached ADUs, some of which could be detached ADUs. It sounds like, based on what staff has said, there are already some laws on the books, like the dwelling groups, and again, SB 9 and 10. So do we really want to take a bunch of staff time up at this point in time to pursue this other option when there's already opportunities that exist for people to expand on their properties? And so, for me, this does not seem like a priority at this point in time. I also do agree that we need affordable options for home ownership. As somebody who's looking to try to buy a house, like I'm constantly looking on Zillow. And the fact that ADUs in other communities were sold from upwards of $1.3 million, my biggest concern is that it's going to continue to drive the cost of housing up. I mean, if you have small units that are going for 1.3 million, and then that means that single family homes with multiple units are going to actually be driven up even higher. And so if we were going to move in this direction, I think it's really critical that, if we're going to allow those ADUs to be sold, that they become part of the Measure J program, where there's some parameters put around them so that they can actually be affordable. I mean, I think one of the things that the previous speaker just said was that, if we have these for sale, you can capitalize on them down the road. That's the problem that we're having with our housing in this community. So we have very small homes that normally would have been starters. And now those homes, 2 bedroom, 1 bedroom, are now like $1.3, $1.5 million for what should have been and was historically a starter home for people who work within our community. And so I don't think that our workforce needs to be restricted to living in rentals. I think we do need to provide more opportunities for homeownership, but I don't necessarily see this as being a solution without some very intentional conversations around how do we maintain affordability with these units in our community. And so I can't support the motion as made. I'm happy to make a substitute motion, but we'll see how the conversation pans out.
Further discussion? Supervisor DeSerpa? Supervisor Hernandez? Just a quick question. In the San Diego example, who was generally doing those developments? Were they the homeowner, kind of mom and pop thing, or were they bigger developers?
So we did ask the staff in San Jose that question, and what they said was, to date, as of the time we spoke, none of the projects had been, built out by a owner occupant on the property. They were all kind of smaller time investors and development entities, because it's a big lift. And especially if you think about the requirement in the state law to condoize both units, the existing home and the new, or the one or more ADUs. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of legal time from very expensive real estate attorneys that know how to file the white papers with the State Department of Real Estate. It's something that would be pretty daunting, I think, for your average homeowner, but they didn't have any evidence of any, owner occupant doing a project that involved either the bonus program or the for sale ADUs at the time we spoke.
And I can add to that, the one that made the news in San Jose is in the Cambrian Willow Glen area where I live, and I went by that property every day. And that was a real estate developer that bought an old 70s rancher, demolished it, and did a 1033 unit out of it and sold it. So both main and the ADU.
And going back to your point about the rapid nature by which state law is changing, would you advise on a preferred timing to bring this consideration back?
Well, the end of the legislative session is in the fall, so I believe it's October 15th is the deadline for the governor to decide to sign or veto. So, November, let's say, we'll know what will have made it through this session. Of course, that doesn't say anything about the next session, right? Just in terms of staff workload, I don't think we'd be able to get to it before then anyway. We still have the BMR Nexus study item to work on through at least March, as well as the two that Mark mentioned. So, our main concern here is about how do we prioritize these among the other things that are already on our assignments list?
Because personally, it may be interesting to hear back, after this legislative cycle, kind of this program concept in the context of the other projects that you're working on. And we may consider exploring that program on that timeline. Like, I don't personally feel ready to say no to the program, but I also understand that the timing might not be quite yet if the state is helping us get closer to these goals. And you have we've asked you to do other priorities like Streamline Santa Cruz and other work that will also get us closer to our goals as well. So it's just, for me, it's about weighing the various priorities. And if, on one hand, any new unit is a good unit. I want to see that. I certainly want to invest staff resources where we'll see the greatest benefit. What are your thoughts, Supervisor Koenig?
I mean, I agree that and that's why I structured the motion the way I did, is that the AB 1033 ordinance, the condoization stuff is more near term, and looking at the bonus ADU program more midterm, and, potentially with coming back after the end of the legislative session and see how the landscape has changed. So yeah, I generally agree with that. I mean, just one thing that also occurred to me while listening to some of the public comment is, I mean, we actually, with all the affordable units that are being constructed, I mean, we could actually see, I think, significant impact on our rental market and potentially even some oversupply and significant reductions in rent. And so really providing, some visibility to the condoization of ADUs may be what keeps ADUs being built into the future. I mean, if people are not able to get a good rental return because there's so many apartments available, they actually might need to see. I mean, I know that's sounds like a fantasy land right now, but I mean, you guys, 700 units just in one small stretch of SoCal, hundreds of units coming online in downtown Santa Cruz, already seeing rents on the west side decrease. It is possible, right? And so I just think we should keep moving forward on the condoization in the short term. It's relatively straightforward, and we can look at the bonus IDUs in the future.
Gotcha. We have a motion and a motion from Supervisor Koenig, a second from Supervisor Hernandez. Would you like to speak to it, Supervisor Cummings?
Yeah, I'm going to make a substitute motion, move to accept and file the report and direct staff to monitor the usage of the condominiums conversion ordinance in other communities, continue to monitor the usage of SB 9 and SB 10 here locally and in other communities, and return with an update after the end of the legislative cycle regarding the changes to state law on this topic. And essentially at that time, we could revisit how we move forward. But I think to Chair Martinez's point, if we want to see what's going to happen at the state, then why make a decision today when we can just wait until after all the state laws have been passed, and then at that point in time we can consider whether we want to continue moving forward within the context of the changes to state law. So that's where I'm coming from with my motion.
I'll second that motion. And, just again, I'm not ready to say no to moving forward with these programs. So it certainly is not an indication of that. It's about finding the right timing and maybe, did your motion include kind of a focus on the condo program first? Or both?
Both.
Yeah.
Both is fine, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, what I'm hearing in your motion is actually that we're not directing staff to work on either program at this time.
Right, it's to monitor and to return after, the state law has been finalized. And so we have a sense of how this is gonna weigh up against the new changes that we're hearing about in state law. And then if we want to move forward at that time, we can vote on it, when we hear about it at that meeting. But it sounds like there are some changes that are being made that could potentially impact, how this moves forward. Rather than making the decision today, we can see what the state law changes are, and then we can continue with this discussion at that point in time. And given what staff has said about staff resources to work on it, on all the different priorities, they can continue to work on kind of what we've already directed them to do, and that will allow them to get some other things accomplished. And at that point in time, we can hear about, how we want to proceed forward. And I think that would actually help alleviate some of the issues that we're hearing from staff today.
I'd like to ask staff, when you presented the timeline, it was long, and this is, in the first place. I think you were suggesting it not even coming to us until like the end of 27, perhaps 28. The motion before us, would you imagine that having further delaying the rollout, or were you pushing it out because right in the here and now you have projects that you're working on and you knew that you'd have the capacity maybe next spring to work on this either way? Because this motion might work with your timeline if that was the case.
Yeah, I'll speak for policy first, and Suzanne can chime in on the housing side. I think it's both. The staffing challenges are immediate right now in policy, and waiting until that legislative update in the calendar becomes more clear really allows us to actually hit the ground running with something that we know, instead of kind of, as Suzanne had a good analogy of running in the quicksand, to then take something to the public for a public outreach that's going to be quick and definitive and a little bit written in a better, more comprehensive, understandable manner. So I think that would help.
Okay, thanks. Further discussion?
Yeah.
Start with Supervisor DeSerpa.
Sorry, quick question. Would it make sense to bring this matter back in front of the Housing Advisory Commission?
I think
because there were sounds like there were 4 members missing potentially on one of the days that this was being discussed.
Yes, so I think my suggestion in the presentation was, if the board directs us to move forward with either of these programs, but particularly the bonus program where it contemplates some sort of deed restrictions, that's the kind of housing policy that I think the Housing Advisory Commission is better equipped to weigh in on than the Planning Commission. So if we do get to a point, at whatever point in time that you direct us to move forward with community engagement on a proposal like that, I would suggest that that part of it at least be brought back to the HAC. For the for sale part, maybe it's less germane, although they did have some differing opinions about whether or not there should be any kind of owner occupancy requirements associated with the condoized units. Maybe the Planning Commission could handle that much housing policy without bringing that back to the HAC. But that's just, the HAC meets generally every other month. So at any given time, if we need to bring something to them on either of these programs, we could accommodate that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Koenig.
Yeah, sure. I don't love the motion on the floor. I'm not going to support it just because it basically says, doesn't say explicitly no, but also doesn't say yes. I feel like state law is not going to change as far as the condoization piece of this, and that we should keep moving forward with that. And, you know, as far as the bonus ADU ordinance, that, you know, ultimately, yes, keeping that conversation open, I mean, and moving towards getting something done next year is better rather than just taking our foot off the gas completely.
Did your motion say when we would return?
I'd say on or before the second meeting in November.
Got it. Supervisor Hernandez.
You know, I think there's a few meetings back when I kept mentioning that we're in this housing crisis and we need to figure out how to get ourselves out of it. You know, I think this is a solution. It's one solution, but there could be many solutions. But we need to take that first step. And I think that this is a good step at one of the possible solutions to get ourselves out of this housing crisis. You know, if the state changes direction, we could pivot at that point, but we do got to keep that forward momentum and that first step. You know, the timeline is long to begin with. I don't see why we want to make it longer. Let's go ahead and take that first step is what I'm saying.
All right, we have a motion from Supervisor Cummings, a second from Supervisor Martinez. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sorry. And for clarity of the record, this is a roll call vote for the substitute motion coming from Supervisor Cummings, seconded by Supervisor Martinez. Supervisor Koenig.
No.
DeSerpa.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Hernandez.
No.
And Martinez.
Aye. Motion passes 3-2. Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 12. Just to consider staff recommendations relating to board supervisors' compensation and take related actions. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Martinez and members of the board. On August 11th, your staff, you asked us to return with a salary recommendation and materials to consider board compensation. Included in this packet today are the traditional materials that we use to consider salary recommendations for our workforce. There is a 8-county comparable market data chart that indicates that your board compensation is negative 12% below market. There is a consumer price index data point that shows that the consumer price index currently is 3.8%. And we have some internal alignment information that indicates all of our labor groups that have completed contracts in this cycle received cost of living increases over 3 years at 4%, and 3.5%. And there is some discussion about the linkage that you have currently towards judicial salaries. And our recommendation at this time is that you consider eliminating that and have a discussion about that. And then in the packet, we've also laid out some options for you today as you discuss salary recommendations for yourselves. We've indicated that you could take no salary adjustment, or you could take cost of living adjustments only, or you could take cost of living adjustments and equity adjustments, or you could come up with some other alternative approach that you might discuss here today. And with that, I will end my comments and answer any questions you have and look forward to your direction on how you want to handle the current tie you have and the options before you.
Thank you. For this item, I'm going to start by going to the public, and then I'm going to return to the board for an action and discussion.
Thank you, Becky Steinbruner. I left a voicemail for former Supervisor Greg Caput. I hope he'll be one of the online callers. I want to urge you to keep the link with the judicial salaries. I did some research about it, and it was done back in 1970 with the California Constitutional Amendment under Prop 12 that allowed county government to set your own pay by a local ordinance. And the county of Humboldt was the first to take off and link it to the judicial salaries, because to them it showed that there was clear professional equivalence and regulatory, budgetary, and civil oversight was linked to not themselves, but to a state entity. The Superior Court is considered a state-level professional, state-level metrics. Other counties do this as well. Los Angeles links theirs to the judicial salaries at 100% of the judicial level. Alameda County, 80%. Marin County, 60%. So while this county has linked it to 62% of the judicial salary, you can change that. And I urge you to continue this linkage because it provides for the public, it removes the political conflict issue with the public. It shows that you are not voting on your own salary, and I think that means a lot to people. And so I urge you not to break that link and to instead consider adjusting a higher percentage of the judicial salary. As your Human Services said, often these salaries are amended in the fall, and you could get a percentage of that if it goes up. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, is there anyone on the phone?
I see no speakers online, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now return to the board. Supervisor Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. You know, essentially, I brought this item forward because of the process. You know, the process that was brought forward it sounds like back in 1970. I don't think it really reflects our reality of what we're facing today. And the fact that we live in the most expensive rental market in the United States. And there are many other factors that impact our cost of living here in Santa Cruz. My intent was to see if we could have a different process that would allow for our salaries to be reflective of the reality that we face living here in this community. I understand that the timing may not have been great with bringing this forward, and I think to reflect on some of what I've been hearing and the fact that we're gonna have a new board member coming in, my recommendation, and actually my motion is gonna be that we continue this item to the second meeting in January so that the new board can have an opportunity to weigh in on this in the new year. And as a result, what that would mean is that we would continue to stay aligned with the judges at 62% right now, so we'd be making no changes. And in January, we could have a discussion with the full new board intact. And so, as we've heard in our previous conversation, when the legislative session is ended, we'll likely know whether or not the judges got any increase. If they did, then that's gonna come to the board. We will have to still vote on that. It's not just an automatic increase. It will still come back to the board. But based on kind of what we've been hearing and based on some of the sentiments that have been expressed on this board at the previous meeting, that's gonna be my motion, which would be that we continue with the current process and that we continue this discussion to the second meeting in January.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, so that needs a second. It's a completely different motion, so it needs a second, right?
It needs a second.
Okay, second.
We have a motion from Supervisor Cummings and a second from Supervisor Hernandez. Further discussion?
Yeah. You know, I think Supervisor Cummings hit the hammer right on the nail with saying it's not the right timing. Hopefully we'll have further discussions and there'll be, change in our sort of our state and federal economy or state and federal relationship, I guess. And it does give the opportunity for the new person to vote on this matter as well, so.
Further discussion?
I mean, I think we should just maintain the link with the Superior Court judges' salaries. I think that's the easiest, the cleanest. It's what, there was historic reasons for doing that, which is basically just how political in nature this discussion is every time it comes up. And so, I mean, I appreciate the idea of postponing it to January, but, you know, even that, I just don't think it's necessary that we bring this up again in January.
Supervisor DeSerpa?
Well, thank you for tabling this topic until January. I do agree with Supervisor Koenig, however. We ran for office because we wanted to serve the public. This is not a money-making situation, and our salary is adequate. We all work very hard, and while I understand